Hello, this is Bobby here, and welcome to another video. Um, in this video, I'm going to show you how you can quickly and easily create a 32-bit extended dynamic range images with for your HDR files. Now, there are various ways that you can actually process an HDR. Most people probably use an automated software like Photomatix or HDR EFX Pro. Personally, I don't use them because I find the image are very unnatural, they are grungy, and they're very artificial. The way that I do HDRs is using the luminosity mask blending. Now that's a process which is very long and complex and tedious. And I actually don't shoot too much of HDRs. People keep asking me on all my images if they are HDRs, and I keep telling them no, it's not. However, there is a quicker and easier way to really create your HDR images in a very beautiful way, and that's using a 32-bit image, 32-bit extended images. Now, I'm not sure how many of you already know this, but the raw file that your DSLRs actually shoot are all 16-bit, and that's very different than what I'm going to show you now. So if you look at any of these, so all these images are shot by D800. I shot them in Kerala about 2 years ago. Now, if I open any of these images on the Photoshop CC and it brings out the camera, the Adobe Camera Raw plugin, keep an eye on the exposure meter. Now, typically when you adjust this particular slider, this can go a negative or a positive to up to 5 stops. So this can go to -5 and this can go to up to +5. And then you do your adjustment on that. Now keep this in mind, and we'll come back to this and talk back about this when we look at the 32-bit DR files a little later in this video. All right, so that was just to kind of set the context of how that's going to be different than what you just saw. Okay, so here are the 5 images, and they have been shot one exposure value apart. So if you see this, and keep an eye here, this is at +2, this is at +1, this is at -1, this is at -2, and this is what the camera was naturally metering. This was a good setting for using an HDR, primarily because your sun was still very high, so it was creating dark shadows and extreme highlights. So your camera would, this is the best that the camera could do, and probably it was not the best result that any photographer would want to shoot a scene like that. So the first thing I would do is select all the 5 photographs. You go to Tools. You can do this also in the Lightroom. I don't use Lightroom. I use the Adobe Bridge, and I use the Photoshop CC. But you can do the same thing in Lightroom. The people who use Lightroom would know what I mean. But in the Adobe Bridge, you select 5 files, or the files that you're working with. Go to Tools, go to Photoshop, and merge to HDR Pro. At this point in time, oops, just give me a moment. I need to quit Photoshop. Let's do this again. So Tool, Photoshop, merge to HDRFX Pro. Now, at this point in time, what it does is it brings out the Adobe Photoshop, and it starts to merge all those 5 files that we have selected. And I'll just show you in a minute what it does. It is aligning all the images based on the content. It adjusts the images to the best of its understanding. And once it has done this, it actually will spring out a particular window, and it's going to come up right now. Here we go. It brings this window, which is the merge to HDR Pro interface. Here are all the 5 images we had selected. When you do this for the first time, it actually does not bring up the 32-bit mode. It brings up the 16-bit mode. And if you see here, what it does, what the Photoshop does is it actually averages out all your dynamic range and already creates an image that it thinks is the perfect image. And this is pretty good, considering what we started off with, the 5 images which were so different in its exposure value. This is actually a pretty good job. You can, at this point in time, start playing with your sliders here and adjust this image to your liking. But this is still a 16-bit, and this is not what I'm trying to show you, though. So what I do at this point in time is I change this to a 32-bit. It removes all its adjustments, but when you play with the slider here, what you can see is it has all the values of your absolute lowlights to a complete highlight. All right, so you can leave the slider where it was. You can also remove ghost at this point in time. the way I do removing ghost is I pick an image where the cloud is probably at its best. So probably maybe that will be this image here. Oops, let's just try this again. Here we go. Oh, all right, yeah, now it comes, the green box here, right? So this is the image it will use as a base to remove all the ghost. Once you're done, you just press OK. It creates a merge file. It creates a single file out of the 5 files, and that's where the trick starts, right? So at this point in time, these are 5 files, 5 16-bit files that we were working on. But what we are saving now is in a 32-bit mode. And I'm just going to show you in a bit how that changes when you start processing or reprocessing this again. So this was the step 1 in this HDR processing, and then there is a step 2. Just give it a minute. Here we go. All right, once it's done, it creates the image, brings it up here. All right, it probably doesn't look all that great compared to the one we saw where the Photoshop had actually automatically adjusted the dynamic range. All right, so don't worry. What we will do now is save this file, and I'll save this file in my HDR folder. However, I don't save this as a Photoshop file or a JPEG file. I save this as a TIFF file. And this is what you have to remember. You need to save that file as a TIFF file. Press save, press OK, and I can quit Photoshop at this point in time. I'm not going to save this. I've already saved. In my bridge, I go back to the folder where I had saved the file, which was here, and this is the TIFF file we had saved. I'm going to pick this TIFF file up, brings up the Photoshop CC, brings up the ACR plugin out, and here we are. Now, you remember what I told you last time. The exposure value for all 16-bit images are plus and minus 5. Now look what happens for the 32-bit file. The exposure value is minus 10 to plus 10. And that's the difference between what we were doing earlier to what we can do now. So you have an extended, very deep dynamic range for both highlights and lowlights, and gives you complete control over what you want to really show to your viewers for your highlights and lowlights. Now thereafter, the process of processing this is very standard. So you would adjust the sliders to your liking. Well, probably a good way to do is start with auto. I these days like images which are darker in its looks. So let's see. I mean, I'm just going to give you a very quick update on what I could potentially do here. Tweak vibrance a bit. All right, this is pretty good. And you open it, and then thereafter you can do your own processing to this image. Now if you look at this is much more contrasty, much more sharper, much more vibrant, so to speak, of HDR than the one that the Photoshop created automatically while using the 16-bit formula. And this definitely is much more natural than the ones you will create using Photomatix or HDR EFX Pro. You can use techniques that I've talked about in the past to kind of work with the saturations, work with the luminosity mask, or just anything else that you would like to do. All right. This video is already about close to about 9 minutes. I'm going to stop here. I hope you liked it. Feel free to leave me your comments. And until next time, thank you so much for watching.